Greetings, listeners. Today we undertake a thorough and systematic examination of Vishnugupta, more widely recognized as Chanakya or Kautilya, a figure whose intellectual legacy has frequently been misunderstood and confined to the narrow domains of geopolitical strategies and domestic power struggles. This restrictive perception has led to an incorrect association of one of the greatest statesmen of the ancient period with Niccolo Machiavelli, whose work, at its most generous interpretation, merely replicates the thoughts of Chanakya in his avatar as a realist diplomat. Yet, to limit Chanakya to such a comparison is to fundamentally misrepresent his contributions. He was not merely a tactician in the mold of Machiavelli, he was a philosopher, an economist, and an extraordinary statesman deeply rooted in the long standing traditions of Indian political thought. His seminal text, the Arthashastra, stands as a monumental testament to his heritage. Let us proceed with a detailed analysis tracing the origins of his ideas, exploring the philosophical underpinnings, and elucidating why the parallel with Machiavelli fails to capture the full depth and breadth of his vision. Chanakya's intellectual framework was not conceived in isolation. It emerged from a vibrant and sophisticated tradition of political discourse that had flourished in India for generations before his time, a legacy shaped by two primary schools of thought, that of Brihaspati, revered as the guru of the Devas, the divine beings who find mention in ancient Indian texts, and that of Shukracharya, the guru of the Asuras, often depicted as their adversarial counterparts. These figures embodied distinct philosophical approaches to the art and science of governance. What is particularly striking about this tradition of political discourse is the virtual absence of a debate concerning the penultimate objective of the state. Across both schools, there exists a unanimous and undisputed acceptance that the state's primary purpose is the protection and preservation of Dharma. Dharma is a concept which is rich with layers of meaning encompassing righteousness, justice, and duty. However, at its very core, Dharma is the order that sustains universal harmony. In the political sphere, it serves as the moral and structural foundation that ensures stability, equity, and the flourishing of life. Dharma, in the political context, therefore, is that which creates an environment that facilitates the pursuit of prosperity. This lack of contention over the state's purpose is indicative of a highly evolved nature of political discourse in ancient India. The intellectual energy was not expended on questioning the fundamental why of the state's existence. Such a question was deemed settled, but rather on the perfecting of the how. The methods, the strategies, and mechanisms by which this universally acknowledged objective could be realized. The gravity of this purpose was immense and accepted without dispute. Any failure in maintaining Dharma would inevitably result in chaos, unraveling the social fabric and signaling the end of civilization itself. This shared conviction underscores the intellectual maturity and depth of the milieu in which Chanakya operated, a foundation he both inherited and enriched with his own insights. This emphasis on Dharma naturally lends itself to a comparative analysis with Western political philosophy, particularly to social contract theory articulated by Thomas Hobbes, a towering figure in the development of liberal thought. Hobbes, in his seminal work Leviathan, argued that the purpose of the state is to assure civil peace and security, rescuing humanity from the anarchic state of nature where life is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. The parallels with the Indian tradition are immediately apparent. Both systems position the state as a critical bulwark against disorder and societal collapse, a mechanism to prevent the descent into lawlessness and strife. However, the Indian framework as Chanakya engaged with it extends beyond Hobbes' conception in a manner that demands careful scrutiny. In Hobbes' model, the responsibility for ensuring peace and security rests exclusively with the state, a centralized authority that imposes order from above through its sovereign power, often with an iron hand. By contrast, the maintenance of dharma is not the sole preserve of the state but a collective responsibility borne by the entirety of society. Every individual, every community, every stratum has a role to play in upholding this cosmic order. The state is entrusted not with creating dharma unilaterally, but with ensuring that this collectively maintained principle remains untainted, resilient against corruption, and steadfast in the face of challenges. This distinction is profound and transformative. It elevates the state from a solitary enforcer of order to a guardian of a broader societal commitment, a role that integrates individual agency with collective duty. The methods and sophistication with which checks and balances were established to preserve dharma are nothing short of incredible. These mechanisms, intricate in their design and multifaceted in their application, reflect a level of political thought that is both practical and visionary, deserving a dedicated study of its own. For our purposes, it suffices to recognize that Chanakya operated within a tradition that blended communal responsibility with state oversight, a nuance that sets it apart from Hobbes' more authoritarian and state-centric vision. The practical execution of this universally agreed upon objective, however, reveals a vigorous dispute between the two poles of Indian political thought, Shukracharya school and Brihaspati school, concerning the means by which dharma should be upheld. Shukracharya's approach is resolute and uncompromising. He prescribes danda or punishment as the primary method to maintain dharma. Danda, literally a stick or rod, symbolizes the use of force, coercion, and punitive measures to enforce compliance and uphold righteousness. This school posits that a firm and unwavering hand is indispensable to keep society aligned with the principles of dharma, emphasizing discipline and authority as the bedrock of order. Shukracharya's lines on danda reflects a belief that human nature, left unchecked, tends towards deviation and disorder, necessitating strict oversight and consequences to preserve the moral framework. Brihaspati, however, advocates a more comprehensive and balanced strategy. He does not dismiss danda. Punishment remains a critical tool in his arsenal, essential for deterring wrongdoing and enforcing justice, but he insists that it must be complemented by varta, which pertains to economic life and the material prosperity of the people. Brihaspati recognizes that while punishment can curb transgressions and maintain order, it is insufficient without the economic stability that enables individuals to fulfill their duties under dharma. Prosperity, in this perspective, is not a secondary concern but a prerequisite for the sustenance of a righteous society, providing the resources, security, and conditions necessary for virtuous living. Chanakya, in the opening passages of his Arthashastra, salutes both these great thinkers, acknowledging their foundational contributions to the science of governance. He does not align exclusively with either, but synthesizes their insights, placing great importance on both danda and varta as essential measures to maintain dharma in society. Punishment serves to enforce order and justice, ensuring that transgressions are met with swift and appropriate consequences, while economic well-being fosters the conditions for a stable and virtuous populace, reducing the economic desperation that often leads to disorder. This integration exemplifies Chanakya's pragmatic yet philosophically rich approach, blending coercion with nurturance in a manner that reflects his deep understanding of the interplay between human behavior and societal needs. Chanakya's vision for the state's responsibilities flows directly from this synthesis, articulated with precision and clarity in a manner that underscores his strategic acumen. He asserts that the state, under the stewardship of the king, must fulfill two paramount duties. First, it must prevent Matsya, the law of the fish, where the bigger fish devour the smaller ones, a vivid and evocative metaphor for a society devoid of justice, where the strong exploit the weak without restraint or consequences. This state of affairs represents the antithesis of Dharma, a condition of lawlessness and predation that the state is obligated to eradicate. Second, the state is charged with ensuring Yogakshema, the welfare of the people, a concept that encapsulates two distinct yet interconnected dimensions: the pursuit of vriddhi, meaning prosperity, and the avoidance of kshaya, signifying decline or ruin. To accomplish these ends, Chanakya delineates two fundamental steps: labha, acquiring of territory, and palana, the protection of that which has been acquired. As elucidated by scholar P.K. Gautam, the Arthashastra fundamentally describes the means of acquisition and protection of the earth, its land, its resources, and its inhabitants. This dual process is not merely a military or administrative exercise, but a strategic framework designed to secure the conditions for Dharma and Yogakshema to flourish. Yet, Chanakya's ambition is not one of boundless imperialist expansion beyond the subcontinent. His focus is directed towards the political unification of the Indian subcontinent, a goal rooted in consolidating a cohesive civilizational entity rather than pursuing territorial aggrandizement for its own sake or for the glory of conquest. This deliberate restraint distinguishes his thought from the aggressive militarism of other ancient powers, grounding his strategy in a specific geopolitical and cultural context that prioritizes stability, unity, and the welfare of the subcontinent's people over unchecked expansionism. At the heart of Chanakya's philosophy lies his perception of the state as a necessary evil, an entity indispensable for societal functions yet inherently limited in its scope and authority, a tool to be wielded with caution rather than an end in itself. He confines its purpose to a singular objective: providing security to the earth, its resources, and its people, thereby establishing an environment conducive to the pursuit of prosperity. A celebrated dictum from his work encapsulates this ethos with striking imagery. Collect taxes from a taxpayer just like a bee collects honey from a flower without disturbing its petals. This analogy is deliberate, profound, and rich with implication. Taxation is an essential mechanism for the state's sustenance, enabling it to fulfill its protective role, but it must be executed with restraint, care, and a sense of balance, preserving the well-being and dignity of those taxed rather than burdening them to the point of distress. The modern government, profoundly shaped by Chanakya's influence under Emperor Chandragupta, embodied his principle through its well-established spy network, a system that stands in stark contrast to modern parallels like the Soviet Union surveillance apparatus. Unlike the Soviet model, which targeted citizens to enforce ideological conformity and suppress dissent, the modern spies were directed inwards, tasked with monitoring government officials rather than the general populace. Chanakya harbored a profound apprehension of the affinity of officials towards corruption, recognizing their propensity to abuse power for personal gain, a tendency rooted in human nature and exacerbated by the opportunities inherent in positions of power. He famously concludes that it is almost impossible to construct a state entirely free of corruption, asserting that one must always assume a small degree of it persists as intractable reality. This candid realism underscores his deep distrust of the state and its mechanisms, viewing them as tools requiring constant vigilance, oversight, and constraint rather than entities to be revered or allowed unchecked dominion over the lives of the people. Despite this skepticism, Chanakya places immense emphasis on the honesty expected from the king and his officials, a standard that is both a moral imperative and a practical necessity for effective governance. They bear the responsibility of understanding the needs of the people, discerning their challenges, aspirations, and material conditions with clarity and empathy, to formulate policies that enhance administration and promote welfare. This expectation transcends mere ethical posturing. It is a cornerstone of the state's ability to fulfill its purpose. Without such integrity, the state cannot ensure Yogakshema, nor can it sustain the prosperity and stability required for Dharma to endure. The spy network served as a practical instrument to ensure and enforce this honesty, acting as a check against the corrupt tendencies of officials who might otherwise undermine the state's mission through greed and negligence. Chanakya's insistence on this balance, acknowledging the inevitability of corruption while demanding integrity from those in power, reflects his nuanced understanding of governance as a complex interplay of idealism and pragmatism, a system requiring both vigilance and virtue to function effectively and serve the people it governs. In conclusion, Chanakya's Arthashastra transcends the reductive view that aligns it solely to geopolitical and domestic struggles of power, a perspective that prompts superficial comparisons with Machiavelli. It is a profound exposition of political thought rooted in the protection and preservation of Dharma as a collective responsibility of society upheld through the dual mechanisms of Danda and Varta. The state under Chanakya's guidance must prevent Matsya and ensure Yogakshema by acquiring and protecting territory. Yet its scope remains confined to the subcontinent, eschewing imperialist overreach beyond its natural boundaries. He regards the state as a necessary evil, its sole function being to provide security, a principle vividly reflected in his taxation analogy and the modern spy network's focus on officials rather than citizens. His recognition of inevitable corruption coupled with an insistence on honesty from the king and his administration reveals a statesman of remarkable depth and foresight. On comparative analysis, his thought shares Hobbes' focus on security but surpasses it by embedding the state within a collective societal framework, a dimension that enriches its scope and purpose beyond the mere imposition of order. To equate Chanakya with Machiavelli is to overlook this richness. He was not merely a realist diplomat, but a philosopher whose contributions stand as a pinnacle of ancient political discourse, a legacy that demands recognition on its own terms rather than as a footnote to Western parallels. Thank you for engaging with this detailed exploration of Chanakya's ideas. If this analysis has enriched your understanding, I invite you to subscribe and share our reflections, perhaps on the parallels or divergences between Chanakya, Hobbes, and Machiavelli in the comments. Until our next discourse, farewell.